Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Boricuabc2 show. I am totally honored and totally psyched to have our new guest today on the show. A quick bio on our guest. He is a seasoned journalist turned communications executive, anti-corruption pioneer, and educator. His contributions span media, global development institutions, civil society, advocacy, and academia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Frank VOGL to the show. Good morning, Frank. Good afternoon.
Great to be with you and everybody who's following you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. We are very happy here. We are over the 200,000 mark on followers now, which is really cool. The show's only been around for 5 months, and we've just been rapidly growing. So it's really exciting.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Frank, with your corruption background, let me start with this question. Have you ever encountered such levels of corruption as we are seeing now?
I haven't.
You haven't?
I mean, ancient Rome was not exactly the cleanest place.
Of course.
We are in a new era, and it's largely because it's incredibly easy to move money across countries into different types of investments, steal that cash from governments, move it somewhere else. And the temptations are enormous. And as a result, we are truly in a corruption quagmire.
Right.
It's getting worse by the day, and it affects everybody. I think the one point I want to really get through today is corruption is not a victimless crime.
Correct.
There are always victims. And whether those victims are people being bombed in Ukraine because Russian generals have become very, very rich, as have Russian military companies as a result of the war that Putin has led against Ukraine, is something that people don't often connect. Almost every war has a strong corruption element in it. And whether it's Bibi Netanyahu, who's been facing corruption charges and on an endless trial, and is trying to somehow stay in office to stave off that corruption charges, which will send him to prison, or whether it's Putin, or whether it's Donald Trump and his family and the oligarchs who he's put in his cabinet, all making money illegally at the expense of the taxpayer and the citizens everywhere.
Yeah. Frank, do you have, it's great that you make the analogy to Rome and all the other corruptions that are the corrupt governments that are happening, but do you have a specific time frame or a specific event where we kind of crossed that proverbial red line into corruption in the United States? Was there a catalyst? Was there something that really triggered it to go full run?
Well, the United States has a very long history of corruption.
Right.
If you go back into the way in which politics in New York used to be run, in the so-called Tammany Hall,
yeah, sure.
You would find massive corruption.
Right.
If you did a survey, as a friend of mine, Professor Michael Johnson, has done over many years of corruption in America, you would find that the state of Alabama, per head of population, is the most corrupt state in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We have corruption from Alabama to Chicago, all famous incidents, many, many cases. So there's a long history. What is different today is that there has not been in our lifetimes a president of the United States who has been so brazen about using the power of the presidency to enrich himself and his family and his friends. It is a very blunt, shameless level of corruption that we've never seen before.
Again, when you see what's happening now with the Trump administration, this leads into my next question, which you just perfectly led me into, especially with regards to the Trump administration. Are we entering a point where the country and the citizenship of the United States specifically, but the world, almost have to accept to a degree that corruption is a new norm?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. I've spent the last
Yeah.
35 years trying to fight corruption.
Okay.
And so I won't accept that idea. But I
Okay.
will say this uh, there is bound to be a backlash
Hmm.
when governments are literally extorted by the US president. And we're seeing this with tariffs.
Yes. Yes.
When universities in the United States are extorted by the president,
Yes.
he's asking $1 billion from the University of California, for example. When the largest law firms in the United States are asked to pay money into some sort of private fund that belonging to Trump in order to be able to access government contracts and government dealings, that's a level of extortion and corruption that is bound to produce a backlash. Uh, it may be a backlash at the US polls. We have midterm congressional elections in November of next year. It may be a backlash by governments around the world who say, wait a second, this extortion is just unacceptable. President Lula in Brazil
Hmm.
has said absolutely that because they are putting on trial a man called Bolsonaro, the
Yes,
former
of course.
president, who tried to organize a military coup. Uh, Bolsonaro is a friend of Trump's.
Right.
So Trump said, if you continue to prosecute him, I'm putting on a 50% tariff on all exports from Brazil. Well, President Lula has said, basically, get lost.
Right.
I think there will be more governments around the world. There will be more institutions that will finally say, the more we give this guy, the more he'll ask, the more he'll demand. This level of extortion, corruption, uh, is unsustainable. And therefore, I'm quite optimistic there'll be a backlash.
Frank, I got to tell you, I'm laughing to myself because you are literally must have read my cards prior to the show because you're teeing up every question as they come up with your comments. It's brilliant. I appreciate that. So as a lonely podcaster who is very much busy in social media and so on and so forth, as a resistor, as a fighter, you know, um, the same thing that I hear from all of my followers and so on and so forth is how do we, as the average American, who are working, who are moms and dads and so on and so forth, how do we fight this corruption, Frank?
Well, I think there are several things. First of all, it's an international problem.
Right.
Uh, there are estimates out there, respectable estimates, that something like $3 trillion flows illegally between countries, uh, much of it finding a home in the US stock exchange eventually,
Right.
but also in cryptocurrencies and
Right.
also in gold and so on. So it's a huge, huge amount of dirty money, dirty cash. Um, and how does this operate? Because if you want people to know what to do about it, you have to understand just some basics of the system. First of all, any amount of cash over $10,000 under US law and regulation needs that comes into the United States needs to be registered in some form. So the guys who are dealing with all this dirty money, they are getting around that regulation. Second of all, um, there's no way that President Putin has any clue how to invest in the US stock market. So he has agents to do it for him.
Right.
And those agents have other agents. I call them enablers
Right.
because they are the lawyers and the traders and the financial advisors and the art advisors on Wall Street and in similar other financial centers, from Miami to Toronto to whatever, who are helping these gangsters who are stealing government money in many countries. They're helping them to get that money into the US and Switzerland and elsewhere and invest it. They are breaking the law in doing it. So the question is, we have laws. Why aren't they being enforced?
Right.
And unless the public demands of its congressmen and the people it elects, and I would say in the US, it's a state, local government, as well as the federal government, the laws that we have on the books have to be enforced. One of the first things that President Trump did when he became president a few months ago was to say to the Justice Department, don't enforce all these anti-corruption laws.
Right.
But there has to be a pushback, and citizens need to say to their congressman, we are being ripped off. We personally are being ripped off because vital resources that need to be controlled and regulated to make our financial system safe and our economy sound are being violated. If citizens are not aware of this and demanding enforcement of existing laws and regulations, I'm not talking about a whole new set of laws.
Right.
I'm
Right. Exactly.
saying, do we have to enforce the law? I'll give you one simple example, if I may.
Yeah. Please take your time.
If you wanted to buy a extremely expensive work of art at a major auction house in New York, that auction house will not ask you where you got your money from. Moreover, they will tell you that if you want, they will not reveal your name as the buyer. Well,
Wow.
isn't that just perfect?
Yeah.
If you're a gangster and you've got all this corrupt money and you want to park it somewhere and you buy a Picasso painting for $100 million and nobody asks any questions. If you want to buy a high-rise apartment building for say $1 billion instead of 100 million for an artwork, there is no actual enforcement today of any regulations that tell the real estate developer or the agent to ask where you got your money from.
Hmm.
Um, it is easier to set up a anonymous holding company in Delaware than to get a library card.
Yeah.
So
That's that's
if a,
staggering.
if an ordinary citizen goes to his bank and says, I want to borrow $5,000, the bank will give him all sorts of forms to fill out. They'll ask all sorts of questions. But if you come along with your $100 million to buy your piece of art, no questions asked.
That's unbelievable. Frank, but can you elaborate a little bit further on this point? Because this is a common grief that I'm hearing from my people is that we totally agree that the laws need to be enforced. But how do you deal with that when the enforcers are in fact part of the corruption?
Well, you have to believe in a democracy
Correct.
that citizens have rights, particularly when it comes to elections. If they are willing to vote for people who basically are crooked, then they deserve, if you will, the penalties they pay. What we have learned in just the last few months, because of this brazen, shameless approach of Trump and his family, and I'll illustrate that in a second. What we have learned is that too many people in this administration and in the Congress are willing essentially to sign a blank check to Trump to do whatever he likes. Citizens have rights. They need to find out more about that. And then they need to challenge the people who are standing for election in their districts and say, what are you going to do about it? And not let those people off the hook. And if those people are taking money from really big financial interests, whether it's called Elon Musk or whether
Hmm.
it's called the cryptocurrency industry, then voters need to know exactly what is being asked for in return.
Right.
And these questions are not being asked sufficiently across the country.
Can you, this is a two-part question. Well, let's combine the questions because I think it'll make more sense that way. With your vast experience monitoring corruption, so on and so forth at the global level, could you give us an example of a country that went through similar types of mass corruption, came out of it and was successful? And then the second part of that question is, do you see the US surviving it?
Um, Chile
Chile.
in
Okay.
South America was for a time ruled by generals.
Right.
The leading general was General Pinochet.
Pinochet. Right.
He had a secret bank account at the corner of Georgetown in Washington, D.C. It was at Riggs National Bank,
Hmm.
uh, where a lot of the money that he stole in Chile somehow disappeared, got deposited right in the heart of Washington, D.C. Um, Pinochet had a lot of very good friends in different countries, from the White House to 10 Downing Street in the UK and so on. Essentially, they protected him and didn't want to inquire about all of his dirty, corrupt dealings and those of his associates. Eventually, the generals were forced out in Chile and a democratic system was established. Chile is, in many respects, the most successful economy in Latin America and the most democratic. Um, it's a small country by
Correct.
comparison to the
Correct.
United
Yes. Understood.
States. But you asked me for an example,
Right.
and, and that's, I think, rather a good example. However, um, you have to really ask about whether we are in a situation where our governments, and I'm talking about Western Europe as much as the United States, are really intent about doing anything about this problem. And I say that because let's go back to the financial crisis in 2008, 2009,
Know it well.
where the banks of Europe and the banks in the United States were bailed out on a tremendous scale. Millions of people had their homes foreclosed. Not a single top banker was even prosecuted, let alone jailed. And it was absolute corruption. The subprime mortgage frauds have been very documented. Um, Banks did terrible things to citizens, and not a single one went to jail. And if you go through the whole list of all of the major transnational corruption cases involving huge companies, one of the largest, for example, was Goldman Sachs, which was involved in the theft of billions of dollars from Malaysia. If you go through all these cases, the top executives, the very top executives, stay in their jobs, get even bigger bonuses, and are never prosecuted. If we are unwilling as a society to prosecute people at the top of our elite establishments when they do wrong and hurt people, then we're in a very, very dangerous situation. And I think that's the situation we find ourselves in today, especially because President Trump surrounds himself with exactly these kind of people and basically says to them, you're immune from prosecution.
I'm a very huge proponent for law enforcement. I don't understand why it's such a difficult challenge here. I made a question about, how could we have avoided this from ever happening or blowing up to such levels that we're at right now? And I think your answer is going to be what you already gave, which is we should have enforced the laws years ago and we wouldn't be here right now.
Well, wait a second. Let's go back a little bit.
Okay.
Do you remember Enron?
Yes, of course.
So Enron was the seventh largest listed company in the United States.
Right.
And together with a company called WorldCom, which
Right.
at the time was a very, very large telecom company, and a company called Tyco, which was another huge company. They all went, essentially, they went bust because of fraud. The top executives of those companies committed outright fraud, cheating their shareholders. Those top executives went to prison.
Right.
They were prosecuted. The companies themselves were closed down. Arthur Anderson, the auditing firm that
Yes. Yes.
enabled Enron, was
Yes.
closed down.
Yep.
The law was passed that basically ensured that every chief executive officer had to sign the financial statements and state that they were accurate and not subject to fraud.
Yep.
And if he was caught or she was caught falsifying those statements, then prison was the answer. We have not had another Enron, WorldCom, Tyco type of situation since that law was passed. Now, Trump and the administration are trying to weaken and undermine the accounting oversight board that was created after the Enron scandal. I'm worried about that. They're trying to undermine and weaken the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which basically protects people's bank accounts.
Right.
But we have a model with what happened at Enron and Tyco and so on of enforcement. And we need to use that model and just widen it so that it covers not only securities fraud, but the wider area of corporate government corruption.
Frank, this is an opinion question with everything that's going on. How how close do you think we are to losing our democracy, if at that? Will the corruption end the democracy? Could it end the democracy?
Well, as of today,
Yeah.
we've lost our democracy. The question is, can we regain it?
Right.
But we really have lost it.
Right.
When the President of the United States, just like that, can fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because he doesn't like the latest jobs report numbers, when he can simply have people arrested on the street claiming that they are illegal criminals
Right.
without any due process, then we have evidence, and I could give you 25 other cases, you know more than I do. We have evidence of autocratic behavior.
Correct. Correct.
So the question really, again, come back to that phrase of pushback.
Right.
But I think we've crossed the line already with the way in which ICE is behaving, the way in which executive orders are being simply announced, whether they're legal or not. The enormous intimidation of judges that is taking place, the fear amongst many people about opposing Trump. These are hallmarks of autocratic behavior. And the question really is whether enough consensus amounts amongst the American people to support courageous judges so that we have the rule of law restored, and to support courageous politicians who are willing to stand up for the interests of their constituents.
Where would you rank the Heritage Foundation in the midst of all this fraud, in the midst of all this corruption? Where do they get placed in it? Are they the enablers, like you call them? Are they the instigators? Where would they fit?
No, there are two things going on here. There are a large number of ideologues,
Right.
including some of the people who came from the Heritage Foundation, who simply believe government is bad. They would make the case that you need government for national security, but that's it. Otherwise, get rid of the Department of Education, get rid of the IRS, get rid of all of these institutions of government, and let the private sector work its way because everyone will be better off. These are the ideologues. They're not necessarily corrupt. They're not in it for themselves in the narrow sense of getting rich.
Right.
At the same time, and they are very powerful in this administration, starting with the head of the Office of Management and Budget, Mr. Voigt, who
Right.
wrote Project 2025, came from the
Right.
Heritage Foundation. But at the same time, you have people like President Trump, for example, who's totally transactional. I don't think he has any particular ideology. I think he's in there because he's vanity of power and the belief that he can abuse power for his own enrichment and that of his family and friends.
Right.
Uh, and these two forces are working side by side today, and Trump is essentially signing off on so much of what the ideologues uh, are demanding.
When you talk about corruption, I like the way you bring and imply, and correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, imply a tremendous amount of organization in the corruption. It's almost like a crime syndicate, right? You know, that there's this whole organized plan of doing so on and so forth. Where does something like what happened in Washington, D.C. today fit? Is this just corruption or is this just vanity, what happened in Washington, D.C. today?
What are you referring to? Trump's?
Trump's nationalization, federalizing Washington, D.C.,
Oh,
setting out the National Guard and stuff like that. Is that corruption or is that just blatant, stupid vanity?
yeah. I haven't seen. I think it's illegal,
Right. Yeah. Well,
uh,
yeah.
and I think there will be many legal challenges to it. I don't think it's corruption. I'm very. There are two ways of looking at corruption, if I may.
Man, please.
One is a simple definition, which is the abuse of public power for personal gain.
Okay.
All right. And the personal gain is usually defined in money terms. So when you look at the Washington, D.C. decision, um, I don't see any money gain there for Trump per se. There is a much broader definition, which some people like to call legal corruption. Most Americans, according to many different opinion polls, the great majority of Americans see the American government system and the government as corrupt. What do they mean by that? It's much more broadly defined. What they really mean is they see the elected politicians in the country serving themselves first rather than the people who elected them. It's very broad.
Right.
And it's and it overlaps with just trust in government. But in the narrow terms where you really need to think through the system, the enablers, the agents, the money transfers, the holding companies, and all of that stuff which goes into the secrecy of stealing government funds, uh, that's the illegal corruption.
Right.
Uh, and I think Donald Trump is bang in the middle of it, as
Right.
is Steve Witkoff,
Yeah,
who is
absolutely.
who created a company with Trump and the Trump family uh, uh, related to selling bizarre cryptocurrencies, as is Secretary of Commerce Ludnick, another billionaire whose former company is one of the largest cryptocurrency managing firms. Um, as is Scott Bessent, who is the Secretary of the Treasury, another billionaire who has basically endorsed all of this stuff. He
Right.
hasn't been critical at all,
Right.
even to the extent of decimating the IRS, which he's responsible for.
Unbelievable. My friend, I could literally talk to you for at least 2 to 3 hours, but I have one question left for you. This
Yeah.
is a question I ask all my special guests. Some of them like the question, some of them don't like the question, some of them answer, some of them don't answer the question. So it's totally up to you. It's a one-word question. Predictions.
Young people in America and across the world are not going to stand for the abuses of office of their governments, and they will restore human rights dignity to people, and democracy. That's my prediction.
Frank, you have just literally made my day. Frank, stay right there. I'll be right back to you in the green room. Ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Frank was wonderful. Frank, by the way, you're an author. Do you have any books you want to highlight while you're here?
Of course. Okay,
Please.
so this book, oh, you can't see it. Here it is.
There it is. Go ahead. The enablers. Go ahead.
Well,
Talk
there
about it.
it's the enablers. It's about how Western governments support kleptocrats around the world,
I'll be
in
buying that.
endangering our democracy by enabling corruption and money laundering. Um, it was for a short time a bestseller on Amazon's public policy books,
Right?
and it's caused quite a lot of interest because people are really interested in dirty money and who's responsible and how does it work and how does the system work. And your questions earlier to me today, what do we do about it?
Yeah. And I have to ask this question. Forgive me for asking it. The beautiful artwork behind you, what is that?
Oh, these are paintings by me, by
Really?
by my daughter, by a couple of famous artists.
Oh, they're
You
beautiful.
know,
I've been distracted watching them. They're beautiful.
yeah, they all, I don't know if you can see right behind my head. There's a
Yes,
one.
yes, 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 yes. It's Dubon.
Okay, so when I'm really feeling I'm down, I think of Dubonnet and think of a. This is a famous poster of the 1930s from
Well,
France.
I promise
So
you, the
there we
next
are.
if you come back for a second time on the show, you will be allowed to have a glass of bourbon or wine or whatever when you're on the show. How's that?
That sounds perfect.
Thank you, my friend. Stay right there. I'll be right back to you, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. This will be on live tomorrow morning. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.